Hi, I'm Selene Castrovilla, and this is A Heart Full of History, a podcast where we discuss nonfiction history books for kids, how they get created, why they get created, the heart that goes into them. Today, I am solo. It's Valentine's Day as I record this, and I'm thinking a lot about love and hearts. I created this podcast with that name for a reason. I'm always thinking about humanity and love and being a good person. And what makes people do bad things, actually. That's been a huge part of my writing career. Today, I want to talk about two people who were not selfish, because right now, the world, selfishness, it's always been around, but I feel like it's screaming from the rooftops, take for yourself, do things for your own gain, and forget everybody else. And I'm really worried, especially for young people. I think that they need to remember the people in history that were not like that. We wouldn't be a country if not for some very selfless people. And two of them are George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette. And this is my book, Revolutionary Friends, General George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette. And I'm going to talk to you about my process about this and why I found it so important to write this book. You've probably heard, I know you've heard of George Washington. This is February. President's Day is Monday. But what our holiday has been an excuse to really think about the important things. Of course, for Valentine's Day, it's all about the retailers wanting to sell their flowers or whatever. But it's really not about flowers. It's about what's in our hearts. It's about love and love of country, love of humanity. We need to have a romance with the important things. Romance is important, don't get me wrong, but there's more to Valentine's and hearts than just romance. So I decided to talk about this book. When I was a kid, I really didn't care much for George Washington at all. He seemed cardboard to me. Although I knew I was a writer, if you told me I'd be writing about George Washington as an adult, I would have told you were crazy, because he just seemed really boring. So I'm going to skip over the things that I've talked about before that really humanized him to me. When I wrote Revolutionary Friends, I started researching someone else who might have been the most selfless person ever in history, the Marquis de Lafayette. Lafayette was a teenager when he came here. He came here only because he heard that we needed help. He believed in our fight for independence. He just fell in love with our cause. He said his heart was enlisted. And he came here extremely selflessly. The King of France told him if he came here, when he came back, he would put him in jail. Lafayette disobeyed him, paid for his ship to be built, paid for a crew, and they sailed across the ocean, and he was seasick for 30 days while he traveled, and he still managed to learn English. You can't get a teenager to take out the garbage these days, can you? It's pretty shocking that this guy, all because he fell in love with our cause. Now, how beautiful is that? How selfless is that? I had to write about him when I heard this story. This is how I often write my stories. I just leap in because I fall in love with an act, a selfless. Usually it's a selfless. Sometimes it's an extremely selfish act that surprises me. Like Benedict Arnold, it was the opposite. And actually it was Benedict Arnold that led me to learn about the Marquis de Lafayette. Now, I had heard about him. When you're doing research on any subject, you're going to run into little things, little pockets. People will be there and you don't really know how they got there and this and that. You'll hear references, but it's impossible to drop everything and go research them. You're going to put it in a notebook and get back to that. Now, I'd been hearing about the Marquis de Lafayette, they called him mostly, a lot in my research. He just little references to him. I thought it was odd that this French guy was here with us. I didn't really understand it. I was just going along writing about this really, really dark man. And I read about when Washington got to Arnold's headquarters and he discovered that he'd been betrayed by Arnold, that Arnold had sold out the country to the British. And he sank down on the couch with his head in his hands. And Hamilton said, someone has to go get Lafayette. Only Lafayette can comfort Washington. And I was like, what? Why is this French guy the only guy that can comfort Washington? That was the moment when I just had to know. So I wrote that down. And when I finished a draft of the Benedict Arnold manuscript, I started delving into the Marquis de Lafayette. And that's when I really discovered how it's just the most remarkable story. It's really a story of how love conquers all, including war, because the love between Washington and Lafayette that developed really led to the French joining us, because Lafayette, who had made the king so mad, convinced the king to join us. And it all stemmed from this act of this young man caring enough about the plight of other people to leave his really cush life. He was rich, okay? He was noble, and he gave up everything to come here, and he nearly got killed more than once. The British always wanted to kidnap him. They called him the boy. My book is about how he gets the people to build the ship, comes across the sea, lands in South Carolina, and very far from where he wanted to be, which was Philadelphia, managed to get to Philadelphia despite his carriage breaking. A million things happened because that's how determined he was to help us. He'd met Benjamin Franklin in France, who was recruiting foreign officers, but unfortunately there was no memo sent that Congress had had enough of foreigners and they didn't want any more. And when he got here, he got the door slammed in his face, basically. And he said, wait a minute, I'll work for free. I'll do whatever you want. I just want to help. I just want to help you fight for your freedom. And someone realized, well, this guy's noble. We better give him an honorary title, because otherwise the French king's going to get angry. They didn't know that the king didn't even want him to come here. So he met Washington at the City Tavern where the Revolutionaries met often. Okay. Here, look at this beautiful picture of Lafayette. In the background, you can see his carriage is destroyed, and he's storming off from South Carolina to Philadelphia. You can see his determination. This is a really great portrait of selflessness and determination. This is someone who, he didn't have a goal to make $1 million when he got here. He didn't have a goal to take over land when he got here. In fact, what he wanted to do was help the plight of America to achieve the freedom that they deserved. Can we all just think about that and think about selflessness and love for humans, for freedom, for people, for the right thing? This is what we need to do, especially, please, this is so important for our young people, because if we're going to change the mindsets of what's going on in the world, the only hope are the young people, okay? And that's why I decided to talk about this today. I decided to write this book. Basically, the die was cast when I heard about Lafayette being the only person that could comfort Washington. And then I did the research. And so, talking about process, Lafayette is such an interesting person. I wish we could somehow clone his selflessness. And Washington was also selfless, perhaps not to the extent of Lafayette, but he was fighting for his country. He could have never joined us and been just fine. He was fine in America when it was ruled by the British. He was doing well enough, pretty well. And he did it also for the freedom, for helping others, not just himself, okay? He benefited, but he didn't know how he would benefit. He didn't think about, oh, if I do this, I'll wind up being the president. These guys might want to make me king. They did, in fact, want to make him king, but he actually refused to be king. He's like, dudes, we did this. We had this war, so we wouldn't have a king anymore. So that's pretty selfless right there. It's pretty heady to be offered, a throne. So I would call him selfless. I would say these two guys, pretty selfless people. So I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I will tell you the crux of it. When you write history, and I think I've said this before, when you're telling a story about history, there's so much there. And you really have to be like Michelangelo and carve and find that angel, which is the story you need to tell. You carve through the stone until you set that angel free. That's what Michelangelo said. I saw the angel in the stone and I carved till I set him free. And that's how I view writing, particularly when it comes to history, because that angel is trapped in there. I can't change history, nor would I want to. I have to free that angel to tell that story about history. I'm not fabricating anything. What I'm doing is weaving the words to tell that story. My words are basically the carving tool to get to that angel, so you guys have the story. And why do we need the story? So we can realize that this country was not built on greed. The Revolutionary War is not a story of selfishness. It is a story of wanting better for our children, for our whole country, not just the rich. Everybody wanted to be free. And Lafayette came here, nothing to do with it, except he just wanted to help us. I mean, that's wow, right? I mean, it just blows your mind, right? So that's why I'm wearing the Lafayette Farewell Tour shirt. This is the 200th anniversary of when Lafayette returned to America and visited every state that existed at that time. It was 1824 to 1825, and it's a remarkable story again. He revived our patriotism, our love of country, by reminding us of the war and what everyone had been through. And he once again was our hero. I decided I was going to start with Lafayette coming here, and I wanted to end with this really, really touching moment. While he's here, he meets Washington, and they develop a father-son relationship. Lafayette wanted to command troops, and he was extremely well trained, having been in the army in France, and there was no reason why he couldn't do it, but except that for some reason, Congress wouldn't let him. Congress has made some weird choices. They wouldn't let him have the command. They wouldn't really let him have anything except an honorary title of general. And Washington bonded with him so much that he told him, "I'm sorry, I can't give you troops, but I can give you something you don't have." This is, of course, major paraphrasing. It's not what he was said at all. But they had something that Lafayette called a great conversation. And Lafayette was overwhelmed by this. Washington said, "You can call me father." He loved him so much that he considered him his son. And that is just beautiful. Especially, they're about to be attacked. They were in Philadelphia. They were about to be attacked by the British. And for him to sit down and for this beautiful relationship to blossom while they're under this amazing duress, it's the threat of being, destroyed in a battle. Wow. This to me is better than any fiction you're going to get in any movie. So I knew I wanted to establish the relationship. I wanted to have him come here, establish the beautiful relationship between Washington and Lafayette while all these horrible circumstances surrounded them. I always want to show one thing about writing about war. There's tension. It's built in. You don't really have to worry about it. So my goal as a writer is to mine that tension, and really, I just want to squeeze the tension out of every scene. If there's tension left on the table, that's no good. Okay. Some people worry about if there's, you left any money on the table, but I don't care about the money on the table. I care about the tension on the table. So I wanted to share that, and I wanted to end it at a battle that happened on September 11th. Do you think that maybe there's some dates that are just bad? Because September 11th always seems to be popping up with bad stuff. So I want to talk about the battle that happened on September 11th, the Battle of Brandywine. Brandywine was right outside of Philadelphia, and that is where the British came through to attack. It was pretty much a lost battle, like right away. This is pretty reminiscent of a lot of things I've written about with Washington, which I really also admire so much, to lose battles but not give up and ultimately win the war. That again, another amazing lesson for our young people, never to give up, right? In the example of this. So Lafayette asked Washington, he begged him, "Please let me go there," because what happened was that our men were deserting because they were so scared. And you can live to have battle another day if you lose a battle, but not if all your men are gone. So Lafayette said, "Please, let me, I know I can convince them." Now, again, remember, this is a French guy, and he had the love of these people so much that he was able, he jumped off his horse, went to the battle. Washington granted him permission, even though he really didn't actually want to send him because he loved him so much at that point, but he let him go. And look at Lafayette. He jumped off his horse and he convinced soldiers, here's the British, he convinced the soldiers to turn around and go forward and face the opposing soldiers. And for a French guy to do that, like, wow, right? He must have had some charisma. I feel like his unselfish soul, his selfless soul, was contagious, and the pureness of his love must have exuded so much that people were attracted to him. That's the explanation that I can think of, because we were pretty nationalistic, like people were kind of prejudiced against the foreigners. So he kept convincing them to come back, and then he got shot through his leg by a musket ball, and he was bleeding profusely and in intense pain, and he kept going until he rounded everybody. This is pretty amazing. And then he dropped onto the ground from the pain. They carried him back to Washington's headquarters, which is so cool. That building still exists. They have the battleground. It's a national park. These national parks are so incredible. The historical parks. I recommend you go to all of them. If you can be where things happened, I just think it affects you. It gives you a reverence. I think it gives you an appreciation for what people went through before you. I highly recommend you do that, especially if you bring your children. Again, it's so important to immerse our young people in the actions, these selfless actions that we wouldn't be a country without. So Lafayette was carried back to headquarters, and he was put on a kitchen table. There were no beds. Washington walked in with his other officers, and they had this starved look on their faces. No one had eaten, and Lafayette was laid out on the kitchen table. He said, "Oh, please don't eat me." He was always joking. He was one of those guys. And Washington was not one of those guys. Washington was always like Mr. Serious, right? And so his personal physician was there. And Washington said to his physician about Lafayette, "Treat him as my son, for I love him the same." And to me, I knew I wanted to end the book there, the story, because Washington's public declaration of his love for Lafayette was so profound to me, especially having had this loss, not knowing if they're ever going to go on. Congress left Philadelphia, fled in the middle of the night because they lost Philadelphia. It was a real question whether the war might have been lost at this moment. And Washington made this beautiful declaration about Lafayette. And this is a picture. Look at this. Look at that look of love between Washington and Lafayette. It's just amazing. And again, remember, Lafayette was not a citizen. Lafayette was not American, and still he came here and helped us. I mean, come on. Wow. Right. So in writing this book, it took many years first to carve it out. I knew what I wanted. I wanted to start with him coming here. I wanted to have the relationship develop between Washington and him. And I wanted to end with Washington's public declaration. This is a love story, father-son love story set in a war. And it's a love story that really saved America. Because again, Lafayette both personally, he was the reason why the French king joined us, but he also personally became instrumental. He's the reason why we even had the Battle of Yorktown and why British General Cornwallis was trapped in Yorktown and why the war ended. That was really Lafayette, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I think I've shared it before, and I'm sure I'll share it again. I really want to concentrate on how I wrote this story. So what happened was, as you know, I write these picture books, but there was somebody, not my editor, but someone else in the company had this idea that I should write a whole long form story about Lafayette, his whole story. He thought that he warranted that, and I'm not going to disagree. Of course he warrants the whole story, except my mind, I had a certain idea for this picture book, and I think a picture book can be equally effective in celebrating a person as a whole long book about them. If something's well done, it will be a tribute to them. It will work. They all work well. It's just a matter of how things are meant to be. You know, when you write or when you create anything, there is a certain serendipity. There is a certain je ne sais quoi. There's a lot of the mystical element, I think. Inspiration. How would the ideas come to you? Lafayette coming up in my research, but it took that one moment when finally it hit me on the head hard enough that I stood up and listened. A side note about ideas. People often ask, where do you get ideas? Well, there's so many ideas. There's so many ideas roaming around there. But what idea will you choose to write? That's the real question. Because we could literally be crushed by all the ideas floating around, right? But we can't write them all. Execution is much harder than inspiration, I think. I'm inspired by everything. I write little stories in my head. I tell the stories as I'm walking down the street in my own brain. But I'm not going to transcribe them. I just can't. It's impossible. We can never, ever get at all the inspiration that we have, and which is kind of sad. But I think it helps to, I do tell little stories on social media and things like that too. And anyway, all this to say that someone else had a different vision for this book than I did. And I did take on the task of writing about Lafayette's whole life, but it was hard because I already had my vision of what I wanted. And so now I was trying to reconfigure it, and it's frustrating. And also I had not written a longer work of nonfiction, and it was overwhelming. It was like a rock falling on my head. And okay, now we use primary sources. Well, I will say there's no shortage of primary sources on Lafayette. So if you want to do some research on Lafayette, you're in luck because this man wrote a lot of stuff. There's a lot of letters too. There's Washington also who kept all his correspondence. Well, I don't know if he kept all of it, but we have a lot of it. We have accounts from other witnesses. There's a lot. In this case, it might have been too much because I was overwhelmed by his life. And the hardest part about Lafayette is the French Revolution. He was the one that encouraged the storming of the Bastille, which led to this horror where he wound up almost dying. I'm not even going to get into that here. That French Revolution was crazy, okay? And I don't even understand it. I don't think anybody understood it that was there because this mass hysteria took over and you were not safe in the French Revolution. If you were safe one day, the next day they were coming for you, okay? It was this crazy, vicious hysteria that took over. Is one of the darkest times in humanity for sure. I don't claim to know all that much about it. I was trying to make sense of it for this book, but I didn't know how. I have a really hard time within humanity. It's foreign to me, and I just didn't know how I was going to ever make it clear to young readers because there were no answers. It was just craziness. And so I was trying to track Lafayette through it, but in the end, the person that wanted me to write that actually left the company, and my editor and I had always wanted to do the picture book. So we went back to that and went back to the original vision, and voila, here again. Now we have Revolutionary Friends. This book has touched so many people, and there's a lot of reasons why, but I think a main reason is the selflessness of these two men. We have to teach young people about caring about people other than ourselves, about love of other humans. Yes, love of family too. I mean, and George Washington and Lafayette proved that you don't have to be blood relatives to be family, okay? We're all family. So I thought it would be a good day to talk about it because of the month. But I will say that in general, Lafayette is so popular. This is the 200th anniversary of his tour. When he came back, and he went to Washington's grave at one of the most poignant moments. At the end of the book, at the end of all my books, I always have an afterword tie-up, and there's timelines of Lafayette and Washington. We learn about their relationship continuing, but I will show you. Here's Lafayette coming out of Washington's grave. Now, this is Washington's first grave in Mount Vernon. He was moved, and there's a second one. But this is Lafayette coming out. The American Friends of Lafayette is a group I found while I was researching Revolutionary Friends, and there's so many historians in it. It's all people, as the title would indicate, it is American Friends of Lafayette. It's Americans who are so enamored of him and realize that we wouldn't be a country without him. And it is an extremely active group. And if you're interested in Lafayette, I would advise you to join it. It's very cheap to join it. And they have the most amazing events. They have an annual meeting in June. They always go someplace where Lafayette has been. And then they have Yorktown Day in Yorktown, Virginia, which is an amazing, I urge you to go there. It's just such a wonderful place to go, not only for history, but it is just such a peaceful place. The beach is lovely. They have a path through it that's cement, which is so nice that you can really walk effortlessly across the beach. But it's just a lovely place and so important to our history. That's where our last battle was fought. And we go there because without the French and without Lafayette, we wouldn't have had a Yorktown Day. We wouldn't have had a Battle of Yorktown. The French surrounded the harbor so that the British ships could not save Cornwallis. And they came here at the behest of Lafayette. The king sent them because Lafayette asked him. And then Lafayette himself is the one that cornered Cornwallis there. So when you see Hamilton and they make a joke about Lafayette being out in the harbor, it's not true. What I really don't like is changing people's roles in portraying history. I think Hamilton is a great tool. It has certainly made a lot of people infected with history, infected them with the thirst for more. And it's done a lot of really good stuff. But I don't appreciate changing the role of somebody and making them into a joke because I think that Lafayette is portrayed as a joke in Hamilton. It's strange because Lafayette was beloved by Washington, and they make it sound like Hamilton's the one that was beloved by Washington, and it's not so. Hamilton and Washington had a bit of a strained relationship, and Hamilton, I don't know everything about Hamilton. I'm not going to say I do, but I know enough that if you read my book, George Washington's Spectacular Spectacles, The Glasses That Saved America, you'll learn that Hamilton had a kind of a dark role in the whole thing. If you want to know the origins of the Newburgh conspiracy, they land square in the lap of Hamilton. So he had his motives. He was a Federalist, and he wanted. See, this is what happens when you have selfish things going on. He wanted more power more power for the Federalists, and this is how this happened. All this to say that the American Friends of Lafayette, we're all people that have discovered Lafayette and fallen in love with him for one reason or another. And everybody in the group celebrates him. It's nonprofit, and nobody takes salaries or anything. It's just like this amazing group. And they became my people when I started researching. And I would go to Yorktown Day all the time. They have a parade, and they have a ceremony honoring both the Americans and the French. And it's just an amazing time. And if you ever have the occasion to go for Yorktown Day, I urge you to. And the American Friends of Lafayette are recreating Lafayette's whole tour, anywhere where he went during the his tour of 1824 to 1825. They have a reenactor of Lafayette, and they're having activities. And I've been to several of these. It's on the actual dates when these things happened. They are recreating and recognizing them to the best of their abilities. And it's the work that they're doing is stunning. The amount of dedication. Wow. I help as much as possible because I truly believe and love Lafayette and love him. So if you're interested in that, it's the American Friends of Lafayette. They have a website. If you go on my website, I have a link to the AFL, to the tour. I have a whole section on my website about Lafayette, about the anniversary, the bicentennial, and so you can take a look and you can see if there's stuff coming up where you live. More importantly than anything, I would just like to urge us to remember what was in the hearts of our revolutionaries as they fought for freedom, and especially Lafayette, who was not even American and came here to help us. In Washington, he wasn't about personal gain when he became the commander of our army. It really was for our country. It would behoove us to think about these people, what was in their hearts, and try to emulate them. It can't have vanished, all the caring and empathy. I don't believe that greed is so prominent that it is just taken over. I don't believe selfishness is so widespread, although I was walking in Manhattan yesterday, and when you look down and you see all those little splatters of black, that's all gum that people spit out while they were walking. I mean, what is happening? Why would you do this? Just put it in a tissue or spit it out into a waste paper basket. There's a million waste paper baskets. How could you just spit it onto the ground? And it's staggering when you see the amount of splatters. And there's even new ones, green or whatever. My gosh, we need to stop being so selfish. We need to think about other people. How are we going to survive? If selfishness takes over, we're just going to self-destruct. Greed is hurting us. I'm not going to give a lecture on that. But let's remember Washington, his birthday, not only his birthday, but just the man who really we wouldn't be a country without. And Lafayette, also a man we wouldn't be the country without. Let's remember these guys. That's why I wanted to talk to you today about the reasoning behind why I wrote the book and a little bit about the shaping of it. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for joining me. And I will be back next week for another exciting episode of A Heart Full of History. Take care.